Okay, hey, train your plants every day. I got a good one for you today in the STEM lab here for you. Life as it was, and that is that mathematics is like a fist fight. That's going to be the heading on our concept today. Specifically, anything is like a fist fight. More to the model of survival, but we're going to use a fist fight in this model of how we describe it and what we do with mathematics, what we do with psychology. Basically, if you can hang in there for the first 5 minutes, or get through the first initial flurry, or take it to the ground, concepts like that are going to be very important psychologically to understand about what you're talking about. Could be Planck, could be general relativity, could be any variable. Nova-Stroker's air turbulence equation, Heinrich's work, the mass gap. You got all kinds of different theories. Not only do each of them integrate into all fields, but again, we're just going to talk about this in terms of some of the geometry that's necessary. It's some of the bigger questions, some of the bigger problems. That's where we start. When you deal with survival, you may not need that aspect. But then again, if you start with a bow and arrow and you have that thing, you might find a million different uses for that aspect. And that's going to become the environmental change. That's going to be as important as a second characteristic psychologically, how we describe it here in the STEM lab, about how to make that work more efficiently, how to make it happen faster, essentially, how to explain it better within the same survival circumstances. The equation wants to survive, you want to survive, your skills as what you know about those aspects combining, I want to survive more efficiently, is a mathematical construct. It's a form of geometry that's played out in a lot of different ways. So let's talk about this again in terms of that fist fight, or any kind of fight really, a debate. We're going to go fist fight. What we do in this model here is forms. You not only do you have to be good here, but you have to be good here. If you're only good here, your enemy could capitalize not because you know jujitsu and they don't, but because of the observations and the greater form states that you're bringing to this. That would be a greater force than the model of resistance, which is education, causing. There's a gap inside of there, so potentially, without knowing your fighting skills, your technique, your conversation in terms of mathematics, they might know a better one. They might see a gap inside of there that totally cripples you, or in terms of that survival, flipping the dynamics to a new 5-minute conversation. Again, when we're dealing with mathematics, this isn't expending that kind of same type of energy. Again, and that's an important concept. But that's the geometry we use. That becomes that integer in a geometry. Now, I got back from the library today, and I've been doing a few things with the command directive, or swag book, if you will, my general and officer training manual, my direct physics course. Again, I can throw in a combatives model, I can throw in army psychology, an introduction to psychology, and they become command directives. How to do jiu-jitsu, how to do American style boxing when they're both combative formulas. Okay, formulas. This is how we start. This is not only how we start, but this is how we define gravity as a general, a common core aspect. It'll get us more than 5 minutes into this before everybody goes, well, that's not the right technique. Well, I'm the general. I'm gravity, without actually being a real person. You should want to listen to me for, I know mathematics, where do we go? We who are the first to walk the wastelands of the world with nowhere to go, everything wants to bite you, everything wants to kill you, everything is going to start to push your survival function every time you walk somewhere. When you start to pay attention to calculations like that, we make life easier. It seems easier anyways, but we're just adding another state to it. Nothing more than one extra state. I know how complete they may seem, and we can fractalize those infinitely from here. What can I do? Sweep. We can drop back a step, add space. As much as time is an illusion, so is it a model of authority, and it's important to understand this. Anybody calls you Ronin, calls you a bad guy or something like that, well, you got a whole bunch of social aspects, and you got a whole bunch of concepts you have to understand, and they could equally form one of these group states, any one of those patterns or forms or scales and dimensions in terms of the A's and the B's and the numbers of A's and B's that fractalize that system out. And as important as Murphy's Law, you could take your case and flip it on its head because you start to observe it differently. take that to the extreme. Find the whole. Find the aspect of I can benefit myself from those aspects. I can look at that and say, not only is that true, but it's backed mathematically, that space is necessary for a Big Bang concept to be created. Space in this conversation, in order for the boson to survive, to ever exist, had to exist either at least simultaneously with it, before it, and certainly after it. But we know that there is no space here while determining gravity, what I'm trying to get to, north. The end of that conversation, from the beginning of this conversation, 0, 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, when we start to take these maps and break them down. When we start to understand them from why a resume is as important as legal law in determining what Senate does, how they break it down, why you as a person can have as much power, as much authority as somebody that controls the entire UN on one concept. It might only be for a moment. I don't know how long you're in this fight. I don't know how much energy you're willing to put into this. But it is absolutely true. And it can have that much gravity. It can hit that hard. That matter of just you thinking, your noting skills, your ability to understand forms and analyze processes can have the same effect as a supernova and a black hole to pull something down. Pull them to the ground and start grounding and pounding it out. You know, you're going to pound that squared circle in there. Not because you're forcing it, because you understand those forces. You understand all those frames and different examples, and to a certain extent have the authority to play it out in a given space that may or may not exist. Air molecules take up space and time over a given aspect in a model of social events. Social groups, grouping, analyzation, how this falls back down to 0 again. It's a new second. We just broke. Bang. Back into it. Here's the next 5 minutes. So we're in at 7. We're banging it out. You know, somebody might agree with that. How much damage are you taking? Is it a percentageable ratio to the golden concept of the victory that is a positive effect, adding to this, a value? You know, when we break this down, a lot of this is an offset system. You know, when it's really clean and you use the laws of motion or the law of gravity, G equals F mm, m1, m2 over radians squared. You're looking at radians squared and saying, well, that's going to fall to 0. It's going to be anything that's going to say this and this without really being a number. It's a psychological concept, the space necessary to say ugh enough number-wise to mean A, and then B, and then C, a general language. Again, languages don't really exist. How we come up to this and make it make sense to a thing is constant over time and repetition of an abruptly long model of talking about this thing and that thing and that thing, and it applies to the same level of mathematics. And basically we're fighting to make this idea survive against what the universe applies it to be in a language that we could never fundamentally actually squish down to this. The Hadron Collider, in those aspects, they take magnetic and electric waves and electromagnetic waves and circuitry and engineering to create a field that looks like the vacuum in parallel state, but they're still chasing points of gravity that look like dark matter to them. So what did they really create? Yes, it's parallel. Yes, it helps define some of these concepts. What I do in this fist fight is using somebody's psychology. Micromotions and facial expressions can be just as detrimental as a knee to the face. I understand that, and I take advantage of that time, and I understand how to set up those forms with a juke, with a step. Look like I have more authority. I can have mental domination by knowing these numbers. I can take somebody's physics that's 300 pounds above me, 155 pounds, and totally cripple them by knowing forms, by knowing, hey, if they're there and I'm up against that and I pre-studied some of these things, and I not only pre-studied but generalized them for a moment, maybe played out some different time sequences that specialize them a little bit, but still waiting for this real event of this Newtonian motion to really happen. Take out the base of that mountain and watch it crumble. We know this to be absolutely true, but we also know on the invert of that, it can be a very equal but opposite conversation sometimes as well. Back to other forms that would have made it more prevalent. Do you have the time? Is the aspect of the field you're standing in that cage? You know, well, I don't need a lot of other examples here, I just need to be able to take a punch. I need to be able to take that and not let emotions get into the conversation. That's another form, another example psychologically that is created by form states like this. It doesn't matter. No, absolutely it does not matter, but it can matter enough if you piss somebody off, get in their head, as much as the same calculations that go into the atomic bomb. Period. That's how I will end it for you. We both know that this continues infinitely. Switch it around. Talk about what goes on inside of a nuclear factory. One of these forms, the command directives that make up those forms that fall down to these sequences equally. It's a universal, unified system. Both are zero states. I know that one is general, one being universal can open, expand, and close, just being geometry, space. Without space, I can't apply any of these equations. Without scale, to apply that space to a point that maybe I can't explain. Maybe the conversation of just me forcing the oxygen out of my lungs maybe won't apply correctly at this time. Maybe I don't have enough events in the past log of my life. Maybe the universe hasn't gone to the point where we explain those numbers here to truly understand what is happening around us. Maybe we're too far ahead. But a proper balance of those things, of backing it down and being ready to switch out in and out, ready to go, is really what happens at a fourth dimensional calculation. We know fourth dimensions are based in 3 dimensions, which are based in straight line, A beats, time sequences to the one function that is important, A point, that defines A north and gravity in terms of how we understand and what we're describing. I suggest you get on your general's command directive, is what I'll tell you. Know that this breaks off into infinitely numbers of states, not only in the form it's in, but invertly in states as well. I can start with what I know about a thing and describe it as gravity, describe it as a spectrum problem, define it as a boson, define it as a fermion. And it becomes an extreme case. What we know about extreme cases is you're standing on a boat in a box, firstly. Firstly, if you're really in the ocean, and the level of gravity there after the case is reality. I would have to have a given diamond, which is going to change me stepping on the boat, displacing the system at a surface area problem, which is realistic. But that could be, in the paper version of rock that's very heavy, 0, very light, 1, to something that's Aristotelian, put the crown in the water, to something that is very heavy and dense, like a piece of gold. And there it's just the analyzation of a rock, a space of a given form that I haven't given a number to yet. That's what's so extreme about this idea, that I have to run those calculations immediately. And in a given circumstances, they're going to fractalize into a billion different states, which basically looks like a Big Bang. Here. So again, you got to be able to hang with these conversations. You got to be able to train them. You got to be able to know that. And you have to be the general to determine what that is. You can invent a thing. You can define something, and you can stand in there and tell somebody they are wrong. Some of these examples of how the social idea of how gravity works here in a lot of different ways is applied. How we will apply that when we all are relative to this conversation anyways. Maybe not every case, maybe not for every army that's going to define itself under that group and be willing to fight for it, but certainly some of them, and individually yourself. If it's that important to you, it can, because that's what the universe tells you. That there's enough space, there's enough time. If you have the ability, absolutely, to a point. How long do you have that ability? Will you evolve? Will it change? Those math numbers are very important. You're going to need to know them, you're going to need to learn them. How smooth the thing is, talking about this quantum aspect of gravity. Why these functions at 0 can be invertible. I don't need all the other ones. They're generalized enough where only a given certain purpose of them, X, Y, and Z, and how many different combinations that can come in states or special relativity features it can apply to before it starts to break down against who can take it that far, who can travel all the way to from Y, this is the conversation, this is the question, to X and A, the very first beginning to causally functioning this base out, Y, Z. If you can do that, and you can survive in these conversations, you can be a physicist, you can be a psychologist, you can be a parapsychology, quantum mechanics expert, you can be in the MMA if you're good enough. I'll help you do those things in this direct physics class. I'll help you become the generals you need to know and the agents that make up those nations and ranks. We'll teach you how to handle them. Catch you in the next one.